Today I want to talk about Zelda's role in the upcoming Nintendo Switch 2 Direct on April 2nd, because on paper and on the surface, you might say, since we mainly know about a Mario Kart game most likely being there, and it's time obviously for the next 3D Mario, that probably means that we won't be getting anything Zelda at this showcase. And while that is definitely a possible outcome, there is actually a number of different rumored projects going on in the background, some leaked internal code names for a couple different Zelda projects that we have yet to see materialize or even know what they are, that I do think warrants a conversation around Nintendo potentially showcasing this fan-beloved franchise early on, such as before even the console launch of their next generation hardware. Historically, not only have we seen Nintendo in recent generations launch console hardware with a Zelda game playable day one, we also know what happened with games like Breath of the Wild that is now well over 30 million copies sold, and the sequel Tears of the Kingdom on the same Nintendo Switch platform, which sold over 22 million copies at the time of filming. So this is absolutely a juggernaut franchise for Nintendo when it comes to the sales side of things, and you could argue that they will want to show this off to the Zelda fan base in some capacity to the ramp up of this console being sold and available. So I want to break down all of the major game possibilities from the Zelda franchise that could show up there and give my 2 cents on which ones I personally believe are most likely. So we'll get on the same page with all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And we have to first kick it off with what I would say, at least for me on paper, is the least exciting option, although I will at some point replay this amazing generation defining game, and that is the internal code name that leaked a while back from a very credible name by the name of Midori Online that did provide code names for Echoes of Wisdom ahead of its official reveal, giving us the code name of Edward, and that later checked out. And this individual did take to social media to share that U-King-O is an active project in development from Nintendo, and U-King is the internal code name for Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now the -O is very interesting because this is actually how Nintendo handles internal code names when they are porting or remastering a game for another console. You can see examples of this in the code names of Mario Kart 8 from the Wii U, when Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Switch having a -S on the end of the internal code name. There are a few other examples out there that Nintendo does this, and the reason that -O is significant is because it has now been confirmed from the Terra leak from the Pokemon company that the internal code name for the actual console hardware of Nintendo Switch 2 is Ounce, which of course starts with an O. So U-King-O would lead you to believe that Nintendo is making some kind of remastered version of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is not that uncommon in today's gaming environment. You might think it's too soon to do that, but it's actually been 8 years since Breath of the Wild launched, surprisingly enough, and it's something that Sony and Microsoft tend to do relatively regularly right now, especially Sony, where they will spruce up a recent release and give it 4K textures, give it some kind of visual overhaul, and even though it was just one generation old, they still resell it, but they do have the option to provide users who already bought the game a $10 upgrade path, and I'm curious to see if Nintendo would navigate that situation the same or not. But I do think this game rumor actually has a decent level of weight to it, because we also have separate reports from Gamescom 2023 that Nintendo was showcasing some kind of 4K 60 FPS Breath of the Wild playable game as a tech demo that also showed off there was no load times in the world, and developers saw this on targeted PC spec hardware, basically similar in power to what the Nintendo Switch finalized unit would be. And we also have this internal code name. Now, you could make the argument that the internal code name is just for that tech demo that was shown off to developers, and maybe that's all it is. That is a possibility, but with the 32 million plus copies and the continued evergreen sales that Nintendo is getting from Breath of the Wild, it is quite possible that they find it lucrative to revisit this game that launched their Nintendo Switch generation and turn around and market it and show it in a better light than it's ever been seen before at the start of their next console generation. And so this is a game that I think is definitely on the table and a possibility to show up at the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. But again, for me personally, it's the least exciting of the options. The next Zelda codename that could give us a clue as to what's coming from Nintendo has to do with a Grezzo project, which you could take to mean either another top-down 2D Zelda like they've been known for with Link's Awakening and Zelda Echoes of Wisdom most recently, or you could look into their past and realize that they've also done games like Ocarina of Time 3D back on the 3DS, and this could indeed be an Ocarina of Time remake from the ground up for Nintendo Switch 2. Would Grezzo handle that project? Possibly, maybe not, but you could also argue just as much that this internal codename could be referencing something like the Oracle games getting a remaster, because I do think that those are in line to receive them at some point. But Nash Weedle, who I will say I am not the most convinced on their track record overall, but they have definitely put out some accurate things before they were announced, and they tweeted not too long ago on social media, Richard Edward Bernard, and Bernard is the third codename, and one that we don't know what it is, but this is in line with how Grezzo has been codenaming their 2D Zelda games, being Link's Awakening, which was Richard, and Edward, which was Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. So Bernard could just be the next logical 2D Zelda game, and if it is a 2D Zelda game, I actually think it has zero shot of being at the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. However, if it is indeed something like an Ocarina of Time remake, I do think that Nintendo could actually show that off to us and still save it for 2026. I hope that's not the case. I hope it would come out in the launch year of Nintendo Switch 2, but it could be a show closer, a brief look at a cutscene from Ocarina of Time remake and all of the visual overhaul that you would ever want to see from that game, but then kind of use it as a reason to get the console because you know that's going to come out in 2026, which is also going to be Zelda's 40th anniversary. That is something else that is on the table here. So coin flip on this particular code name, 2D Grezzo game, like an Oracle set of remasters, or a brand new game, although I think it's early for a brand new game in the 2D franchise, or the fan beloved favorite Ocarina of Time getting a from the ground up remake with modern hardware. And I do believe that that option would be very enticing for Nintendo to maybe want to show off as a visual showpiece what the console is capable of with something like a Zelda remake like that, because I do think, like we've seen them do in times past where tech demos were created and we saw those Twilight Princess visual styles tied into the Wii U tech demo, that we really have never gotten that ultra realistic, visual style for Link in the modern day. And it could be finally time to bring back that visual style, but throw it into Ocarina of Time from the ground up. And I think that would obviously be a huge win for fans. So while my hopes aren't set super high on that particular project being shown off at the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, I do think Grezzo could be handling something like that, and it might just be the best game that Nintendo could show to get people going out there and buying the Switch 2 console immediately. The next option is a set of games that have been heavily rumored for far too long at this point in time, and I think you already know what I'm going to say. Wind Waker and or Twilight Princess. Would Nintendo actually deliver these games at something like a next generation Nintendo Switch 2 Direct? And that's where, while even though I do believe these games exist and I do think that they may ultimately make it to Switch or Switch 2, I don't know that this is the presentation they necessarily show up at. I would love to be wrong about that. There's a lot of smoke with Wind Waker specifically being cited on Russian retailers within the last 6 months, and also having brand new Korean translations for the game that did not exist before due to the official Zelda timeline posting some updates recently. And nowadays for Nintendo Switch, there are native Korean translations for Legend of Zelda games, but there were not in prior generations. So maybe this Nintendo Switch version of Wind Waker is out there somewhere, but I still feel like at this point, when those games do come over, they're more likely now to be support titles for the current family of Switch systems, as opposed to big Switch 2 exclusive games that got big visual upgrades and things like that, because I think these games were already pretty much as remastered as they needed to be from the Wii U version, and Nintendo will probably port them over like we're seeing them do with Xenoblade Chronicles X and a number of different other Wii U port projects that have just been simple, no-brainer, make the money, port it over type of situations. And fortunately, if Wind Waker and Twilight Princess do come over in the Switch 2 generation, but they come out for the Nintendo Switch, well, we have backwards compatibility, so you can still play that. And I would argue maybe Twilight Princess could use more of a facelift, and maybe that one's saved for later on and is given some kind of more enhanced remake treatment. But nonetheless, I'm really not expecting these games to be here, but there is always that one-off possibility that that's actually what Nintendo shows off to please the Zelda fans in some way, shape, or form at this blowout showcase for their next-gen hardware. And the last possibility, and maybe the most exciting, but also not, because it's probably the furthest away by a lot, but it is 100% possible that Nintendo could at least show us a small clip of the next major 3D open air Zelda game, and at least just say it's in development. Because if you think back to when we first saw Tears of the Kingdom shown to us before we knew it was called that, and it was just the sequel to Breath of the Wild is now in development, we got that simple looking cutscene to set the vibe, the tone, and the world. And then we found out, of course, years and years later, 4 years later to be exact, that the game would ultimately launch on May 12th, 2023. Now, yes, it is true that Nintendo delayed this game for a full year because it was once communicated to us that it would be out in the year of 2022, but nonetheless, they chose to show it off ultimately when it launched 4 years from when it was in our hands playable as a finalized product. So you could argue that Nintendo teasing Zelda games that far out in the past, that maybe we get that first look and confirmation that whatever is next for 3D Zelda is actually in development from a brand new perspective. And I'm thinking that Nintendo's done with that Hyrule at this point in time. I wouldn't be surprised if development was kind of firing up on all cylinders with the major creative minds, while the polish of Tears of the Kingdom was actually being done for that full year, because as I mentioned, it was originally planned to come out in 2022. Aonuma directly communicated to us that essentially that entire extra year they delayed it was polishing the game. So you could assume that part of the Zelda team could break off and actually start to create what is next for the Legend of Zelda 3D franchise, and it might just be time to get at least a glimpse of what that world looks like, the art style, just get a look at Link and Zelda briefly. That is actually on the table here as a possibility as well. Again, I'm setting my expectations lower for that, but technically, if you think about 4 years out from now, we would be in 2029, and I'm certainly hoping that by 2029 we have the next major 3D Zelda game playable. So anything is on the table here. That's where I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video. All your thoughts and opinions on which Zelda games, if any, may show up here at the Nintendo Switch 2 Focus Direct on April 2nd. Do you think we get anything from the Legend of Zelda franchise, or is this Mario's event for the most part and some other big first-party Nintendo IP like Metroid and others? And maybe Zelda fans have to wait until the end of the year or even into next year to get some games confirmed. And let me know which out of all the games would be your most exciting possibility that we discussed. Which one would you like to see the most? And which one that we didn't mention, if any, could you come up with that you would really hope to see at this event and it would put it over the top for you personally? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.